J.R.R. Tolkien writes, "All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king." As we prepared for the word preached, would you join with me your hearts and minds in prayer? Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be found acceptable in your sight, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Ancient people must have thought that cedars were magical, holy trees. Can you imagine seeing these grand trees sprouting up out of rock? They must have thought that their roots could bore down through these large stones, when in reality, the root structures of cedars that go both deep and wide are simply able to find a way through. The roots are simply able to find the crack in the stone that already exists and follow it. They must have thought, too, that palm trees were holy, magical things, when they could see that these trees were always verdant and flourishing, glorious standing there, compared to the grasses and the wildflowers that come the hot summer sun suddenly withered and turned brown. It's no wonder then that the psalmist uses this comparison between these majestic trees and the grass to compare the faithful and the righteous to the unrighteous. The psalmist says, "The dullard cannot know, the stupid cannot understand this. Though the wicked sprout like grass, and all evildoers flourish, they're doomed to destruction forever," reminding us that in the short term, it always looks like evil will win. In the short term, it always looks like the people who cheat and steal and lie will win because they sprout up quick and fast and they look healthy as a horse. But we know, if we take the long view, if we take God's view, that they will not win. No, love wins in the end. The love of God always wins. We had a worship meeting this week, and I have to tell you, if you ever decide to go and be a pastor, you need to have a geologist on your worship team. I'm not going to embarrass you, Allison, this morning. I'm going to sing your praises. Because it's really good when you're someone who's trying to present metaphors for your congregation, metaphors that you can grab onto and look to and that help you grow. It's really helpful to have someone around who gives you a different sense of time. Geologists have a different sense of time. And as Allison reminded me this week, the time in which we're living in, it is hard, it is challenging, but in comparison to all of time, it's a good time to be alive. Time is long. The arc of the universe, it is indeed long, longer than we can even imagine and fathom. And yes, indeed, it does bend towards justice, but we must remember how long that arc is, and that we may not see the promised land in our lifetime. started this week being reminded of how infinite time is and where our place in it is. If there was still something that has to do with trees and grass and palm trees and cedars that we could latch onto, a metaphor for this week that would help us to continue to be faithful people, rooted, not shallow like grass, but deep and wide like the palm trees and the cedars. But a metaphor that would still remind us of the infinite, arc of time. And I found this story for you. So, 2,000 years ago, during the time in which Jesus lived, of course, we know that Jesus lived under Roman occupation, that the Romans came and invaded the Israelites' land, and they laid siege to that land. We know that the Hebrew people suffered under the Romans. But creation always suffers when war happens. Creation always suffers when people get greedy. And this is true 2,000 years ago. In fact, around the time that Jesus was alive, because of the Roman occupation and the destruction that the Romans did to the land, it was thought that the J-date palm had gone extinct because they cut them all down. But in November of 1963, a fascinating discovery was made. Archaeologists were digging through the rubble at Masada. Masada is this ancient mountaintop fortress of Herod the Great. And in 72 CE, when Jewish rebels chose death over Roman bondage, that palace was destroyed and a mass suicide happened of the Jewish people there. But in 1963, archaeologists were digging through the rubble, through shattered mosaics and past charred beams, and through bits of cloth that still survived. And do you know what they found? They found jars of seeds. 41 years later, after this discovery, in 2004, Sarah Salin, who's an expert in Middle Eastern plants at the Hadassah Medical Center, after acquiring some of those seeds from Israel's Antiquities Authority, contacted Dr. Elaine Soloway, who is one of the country's foremost experts in sustainable agriculture. And she said to Dr. Soloway, "What if we plant one of these palm trees? What would happen if we took one of these 2,000-year-old seeds and planted it today?" Well, the story goes that when Salin broached her resurrection idea with Dr. Soloway's initial response was absolute disbelief. That won't work. They're too old. There's no life left in them. But being a good scientist, she agreed. And she decided to run the experiment anyway. And so they tried to draw life out of this seed that had been in dormancy for 2,000 years. So for good luck, Dr. Soloway planted the seeds on the day of the Jewish Festival of Trees. And guess what? About 6 weeks later, that tree began to grow from that J-date palm. And if you go look all of this up on the internet, you'll see this tree now, this J-date palm that stands about this high. Now, palm trees, I didn't know this, come in male and female types, and so they can't yet get fruit from it. They're still trying to sprout more seeds so that hopefully they'll end up with a female plant, because this particular tree, which they've named Methuselah, Methuselah's a guy, and they need a female tree in order to grow actual jadates. But they've also figured out that they could find a tree which is similar and which matches in some kind of way, and they could do a hybrid. It could happen. Now, 2,000 years is still pretty short in terms of time. But it's a good reminder to us, isn't it? When we feel old and dormant, and like there is no new life that can sprout from us, that there's still life in us yet. And when we look at this old space, again, not as old as Methuselah, the jadate palm, but 100-year-old sanctuary that's in need of repair, and we think to ourselves, oh, what new life can sprout from this? We need to remember that there is life in it yet. And we look at this country, which feels like it's not gone dormant, but gone dead in some ways. We must remember that God has planted us as seeds here in this place so that we might sprout up with new life. The arc of the universe is long. We're a tiny, tiny part of it. And we might feel dead inside. But if we are planted and rooted deeply within the mercy and the love of God, new life will sprout from us yet. And time will always end in God's justice. Because love wins. Love wins. Amen.